Hello, and welcome to CyVerse's webinar series. I'm Amanda and work with CyVerse's science team, and I'm one of today's presenters. We hope you'll join us every other Friday through December 3rd for our webinars on technology, platform, and science topics. Many of you already use CyVerse and know that we are a National Science Foundation funded cyber infrastructure project. These webinars help us fulfill a key part of our mission, to train scientists on how to use CyVerse's computational resources to do their research and training. First, some housekeeping, and then on to the webinar. Our presentation today is roughly 30 minutes with type at the end for your questions. Please open the Zoom chat window and type your questions there. As always, a video recording of today's webinar will be posted later on our website's webinar page for viewing anytime. CyVerse offers intensive training, such as our Foundational Open Science Skills, or FOSS, and Container Technology workshops. Please visit our website at www.cyverse.org for more information on this key training using cloud-based tools and techniques for collaborative open science. And now I'd like to introduce today's other presenter, Reetu Tuteja, who's also a member of the CyVerse science team. While Reetu is really a plant scientist and I do transcriptomics on agricultural species, some of our work at CyVerse involves helping users troubleshoot problems with their analyses. So we look forward to using this webinar to help you navigate finding apps and getting your analyses going. So let's begin. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. And if you can't, please let me know somewhere, perhaps the chat. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm Amanda and I'll be presenting first today. So for those of you who may not already be CyVerse users, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the discovery environment is and what it can do for you. So first of all, we at CyVerse refer to the discovery environment as the DE. So if that's what I say, that's what I'm talking about. The discovery environment is a platform that provides a graphic user interface for command line tools. It provides an integrated location for all your data, analyses, apps, tools, results, and it allows you to manage your data, run analyses, and visualize your results, and then easily share all of these things with your colleagues, regardless of where they're actually located. They can be at another university on the other side of the world, working in another country. To clarify just a point of terminology before we get too far in, at CyVerse, when we refer to a tool, we mean a piece of software in a Docker container. All of the tools in the discovery environment are Dockerized, and users can add their own tools and apps. So the tool is just the Docker container, and you would still have to interact with that on the command line. What changes that is the app. The app is actually the graphic user interface that allows you to interact with that Docker container in a point-and-click manner. There are basically two different kinds of apps available in the discovery environment. There are executable apps, which, as I've mentioned, provide a graphic user interface for command line tools. And then there are what we call VICE apps, which stands for Visual and Interactive Computing Environment. This is more for things that already have their own graphic user interface, or things that run in RStudio, or something that's already got a graphic interface to itself. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about executable apps, and then I'm going to turn it over to Reetu, and she's going to tell you about VICE apps. So why would you want to use executable apps? What can they do for you? As I've mentioned, they provide you with a graphic user interface, and that saves you the trouble of learning to use the command line if you don't already know it, while you're also trying to learn highly technical research software. It allows you, because these are all run on remote computers, to launch your analysis and then close the tab in your browser, close the computer, go have a cup of coffee, go home for the weekend. Whenever you come back to CyVerse, there'll be a notification telling you what your status of your analysis is. It allows you to share tools, apps, analyses, data, metadata with all of your collaborators, and that can be anywhere in the world, and it's totally free. And it provides you additional compute power as compared to perhaps your laptop sitting on your desk. Depending on the needs of the tool, when it's integrated into CyVerse, it's designed to run on systems either on our local cluster at the University of Arizona, on the HPC system at the Texas Advanced Computing Center, or on the Open Science Grid. So I think that covers why you might want to use executable apps. Let's go to the DE and talk a little bit about how you might use these apps. And if you go to, I have it bookmarked, but if you go to de.cyverse.org, this will bring you directly to the discovery environment. Excuse me. If you're not already logged in, you'll see a little person icon at the top here. And if you log on using your CyVerse credentials, you should see something like this. There are lots of things you can do here. You see there are lots of different icons down the left-hand side. Today, we're going to focus on apps, and apps is this little grid icon here. If you click on the grid, you should come to a list of our featured apps. These all happen to be Vice apps at the moment. They're things that we want you to look at. But if it's not the tool you actually need to do your research, you've still got to find your app. So how do you go about finding apps? Well, if you click on this drop-down menu here where it says featured apps, you'll see there are lots of different options of subsets of apps to display. Apps under development will be apps that you are building, things that are still private to you. Favorite apps are exactly what they sound like, just your favorite apps, and I'll show you how to favorite things in a minute. My public apps are those that you've built and made publicly available through CyVerse. Shared with me are private apps that your collaborators have shared directly with you. High performance computing apps are those that run at the Texas Advanced Computing Center. My Collections is actually a really handy feature that a lot of people don't make use of. It's a way of grouping apps together in a way that makes sense to you. So for instance, if you were teaching a class about RNA-seq analysis, you might call that class RNA-seq 101, and you would have a collection called RNA-seq 101, and in there you would include the 5 or 6 apps that you want your students to use to do their analyses. And that way you can refer your students directly to the collection, and everyone knows that they're finding the correct app and not just one that's similar, and it makes it easy to come up with all of those. And then finally, there's Browse All Apps. If you click on Browse All Apps, it will literally take you to a list of every single app in the discovery environment in alphabetical order. So this isn't going to be the easiest way to find what you're looking for, but everything is there. If you know what kind of app you need, an HPC app, for instance, you can filter based on the type of app, but that still leaves quite a few to sift through. One of the fastest ways to find things is by searching. So if you wanted to run Blast, you could search for Blast. And this searches not just the name of the app, but also the app description. And because it searches the app description, that means you can search for things even if you don't know what tool you want to use specifically, but you know what task you need to accomplish. You can search simply for something like mapping, and it'll bring up all of the various apps that are involved in mapping. And be sure you click on the apps tab when you search. It searches everything in the DE. So these are all of the apps that feature mapping in some way. And mapping is a very general word, but if you search for something slightly more specific, you will probably come up with apps that are of interest to you. So just for the moment, I'm going to go back to the list of all the apps. And the app let me point out these 2 buttons here. We can't talk about it in great detail today. It can be a webinar unto itself. And if that's something you'd like to see, you can email support@CyVerse.org or go to our learning.CyVerse.org, read the docs page to see the documentation for how to integrate your own tools and apps. But you're going to do that using the Manage Tools and Create buttons. So I'm going to use the Blast P app to demonstrate. And since that's conveniently here on the first page, I can just scroll down to it. So this is the app I'm going to be talking about. Before we launch it, I just want to show you there is some more information available under this 3 dots menu on the right-hand side. You can get app details. This is where you would favorite an app if you particularly liked it. You can get app description, information about how long it's been integrated, who integrated it, how many times it's been run. And if you click on the other tab, you can see which Docker container is actually running behind the scenes. Also under the 3 dots menu, you can copy apps. That's a really useful feature if you want to add one option to an app that already exists. Once something is public, you can't edit it, but you can copy the app, add your one option, and then you didn't have to start from scratch. It's a really good time saver. You can create a DE link, which comes specifically to this app. So people don't have to find the one you're talking about. They can just click on the link and come here, or a saved launch. And saved launches bring you not just to this specific app, but to the app pre-populated with all of the inputs and parameters set in the way that you've specified. But most importantly, under the 3 dots is the documentation option. All of the executable apps have example data in the discovery environment, and the documentation page will tell you where that example data is. This is really good for troubleshooting, or if you just want to look at the input file format or make sure that your output looks correct after you've finished. It'll tell you a little bit about the inputs and outputs you should expect. And at the bottom, it has reference links to probably the wiki docs page for the app that was created when it was integrated, but also frequently for the tool that the original software developers, their documentation. So now you want to actually launch an app. To do that, you just click on the name. And that brings us to step 1, analysis info. The analysis name is always going to be the name of the app _analysis1. If you don't like that, you can change it to anything you like. And I'm going to call it Webinar Blast 2. You can add comments about the app, about particular parameters you've set, or whatever you want, really. And you need to provide an output folder. The default folder is always going to be your username, your home username, home folder /analyses. And for every analysis that you run, it's going to create a subfolder in this analyses folder specific to that analysis. So once you've filled those in, we can click next. And that takes you to step 2, analysis parameters. Here you can see the first section is inputs, and the first field is query sequence. And there's an asterisk indicating that that's a required field. And then underneath it, there's a tooltip that specifies that should be a FASTA sequence file in case you're not aware of what format your input should be in. To get to that, you can click the Browse button at the right, and this allows you to navigate through the data store to find the file you want. So in this case, I'm already in the folder that I want to use because this is where I came last time. But if I wasn't, I could navigate through the data store like that, and then select the Blast P folder, and then we're just going to choose this FASTA file. And now you can see that's populated the field. We'll do the same for database, but in this case, we're looking for a folder, and we're going to use the RefSeq protein folder, and then say select current folder, and that's populated as well. You need to provide an output file name, and you can see here it comes with a default output file name, which is blast output. If it was actually my research, I might choose something more specific, but since this is a demonstration, I'm perfectly happy with that, so I'm not going to. If you wanted to change it, you absolutely could. Okay, so ours is called Weebly. Okay, so the next section is parameters. And e-value is always a parameter that's necessary for a blast search. And here it's got a default of 10. I'm happy with 10, so I'm going to leave it. Again, if you wanted to just type in the field there and change it, you absolutely could. And we need finally an output format. And if you click on this field, you can see it's provided you with a list of various output formats that Blast can create. I'm happy with the default. I'm going to leave it. This app is a little different than most in that you can provide other options in these bottom fields, just as you would on the command line. We don't need to do that, so I'm going to skip them. Hit next. That takes us to step 3, which is the advanced setting. This is something that comes up for all of the apps, and it just allows you, if you have a very large job, to request more computing resources, like CPUs or memory or disk space. Also, alternatively, if you have a very, very small analysis that you would like to run sooner rather than later, you can request very few resources. If you don't select anything, and it is totally optional, it will default to what the tool was integrated with. And that's going to be acceptable for 90% of everyone's analysis. This isn't anything special. I'm going to leave all of these blank. Okay, so step 4 is launch or save. So here you can see it's populated all of these fields that we filled in. You can review them, make sure they're correct. And then at the bottom, you have 2 options. I mentioned before there are saved launches. This is how you would create one of those. If you click that button, you can name your saved launch, and you can also decide whether you want it to be private or public. And that will bring you back directly to this spot with all of these things pre-populated in this app. But we're not going to do that today. We're just going to launch the analysis. So let's click on launch. And you can see it immediately takes you to another page. And right now we're in the analyses tab, which is the little circle with the bar graph in it. You can filter these based on whether they're your analyses or something someone shared with you. You can filter them by the type of app that was run. You can sort based on the column headers. But the default sort order for this is that the newest one is the top line. And you can see Webinar Blast 2 is what we called our analysis. SI user is our current username. This is the app we're running. You can see we have a start date, and we will have an end date once it's finished. You can also see the status is listed as running. And you may have noticed up under the bell, we've received some notifications. So if we click on the bell, you can see it says Webinar Blast 2 was submitted, and then it started running. And we don't need to see that little red icon anymore, so we can mark all of these as red. Okay, so there are a couple icons off to the right-hand side of your analyses. Much like apps, you can view information about your analyses. So if you click on this and then use the drop down, you can see your analysis ID. It's unlikely that you'll need this, but sometimes it's really handy to have. And you can see progress, so what the job has been doing as it progresses through. You can also review your parameters, and these are direct links to the files in the data store that you chose. This is the relaunch button, and I adore the relaunch button, which is apparently giving me an illegal argument at the moment. But I will go back and we'll just tell you about the relaunch button. The relaunch button allows you to open the app pre-populated with all of the fields you just used. So it's a lot like a safe launch, except this is just, ooh, that's interesting, just what you just launched. So for this particular analysis, if you hit relaunch, it will populate it with all of those exact fields as they were. This is really handy if you want to run something with different e-values, several different analyses of the same files and databases, but just different e-values. So you can open the app with relaunch and change 10 to 100 and then launch it again. And you don't have to go back and find all of those files and fill them all in again. Makes things much more reproducible. And then finally, there's the output folder icon. So this is something that only becomes available once your analysis has finished. So either failed or completed. You can see our analysis is still running, so this isn't going to be ready yet. But a couple days ago, I ran this analysis, which is exactly the same thing, and it has already completed. So if we click on the folder, you can see this is our output folder, and we have blast output, which is the name we chose for our output file. And if you click on the name, it will open the file for you so you can see the contents. And you can see this is a flat query file from Blast. So that's essentially what we told it to do. Everything seems to have worked. You may also notice that there's a logs folder. There will always be a logs folder in the output. And the logs folder is frequently overlooked, but really very useful. You can see there are a lot of files in here, and the ones you're going to care the most about are going to be Condor standard error and Condor standard out. In this case, everything ran correctly, so there were no errors, and Blast doesn't provide a lot of output when it runs. So you can see both of these files are empty. So what if our analysis had failed? If we go back to the analyses page, you can see I also ran another analysis a couple days ago called Blast Webinar Nuke. And in this case, I provided a nucleotide database instead of a protein database. And you can see that had the expected effect of failing. And if you click on the output folder for this one, you can see we don't have the Blast output file. It didn't work correctly. You may or may not recognize these as nucleotide database files, but that's what they are. And then you have your logs file. So if you open that, you can see Condor standard error now has contents. So if you open the standard error file, it should give you some information about what may have happened. Now, depending on the tool, this may be more or less understandable. So usually at the bottom is where you find the most pertinent errors. So in this case, offending value Blast database, offending value Blast database. It seems to have a problem with our Blast database, but it's not terribly specific about what's wrong with it. So how else might you find out what's wrong with it? Well, you can go back to your analysis and look at the information. You can see the job summary. Well, that's the one that's still running. Let's go to this one. Okay, so this is the one that's completed. You can see where the job summary is, and you can look at how it passed through. You can review your parameters under there as well. You could relaunch it and look carefully at your file paths to make sure they are what you think they are. You could go back to the app documentation and see the example data. You could try running it with the example data. You can look at the input data to make sure yours is in the correct format. But let's say none of that works, and you think maybe someone else in your lab who does these kinds of analysis might know the answer. If you select this failed analysis here, and then choose the button that says share, I'm going to share this with Reetu, and her username is Reetu. So if we select her, you can see that's the right person, and you can choose her permission level, read, write, or own. Or you could, if she already had share access, you could also remove it here. And then you'd click done. And that's going to share this analysis with Reetu. It will show up in her analyses window, just like it does in ours. And she would have the ability to relaunch it, view the parameters, look at the job summary, look at your input files. So she might be able to figure out what's wrong. But if none of that works and you don't know what's going on, what you can do is you may have noticed that the status is a link. And if you click on this link, it gives you all sorts of little troubleshooting ideas to try. Please try them. One of those is that there are special characters in your file names. Something a lot of people aren't aware of is that on the command line, you can't use special characters. So dot, dash, and underscore are usually acceptable, but things like spaces and exclamation points and slash marks don't work. So that's always something to check. You can check your input file format, check to see if your input files are corrupted, check all your parameters. This will direct you to some of the documentation. And if none of that answers your question, you can click I still need help, which brings up this page. And basically this is asking you if you're willing to share this analysis with everyone on our science team. At the moment, there are only 4 of us, and it will take you out to a list of who we are. You can ask one of us to recuse ourselves if you don't want us to look at it. But as long as you are okay with sharing it, you can confirm that. Put any comments you have in there about what you may think is happening or what you've checked so far or what you're confused about. Any information helps. And then you would submit this. And once it's submitted, it's shared with all of us so that we can interact with your analysis. And it also opens a support ticket so that we can see there's an issue. So keep in mind, we are mere mortals. We don't know every single kind of research software and every parameter. So we may not be able to answer your question, but if it is an actual problem with the app, or if it's something we're familiar with or have seen before, we'll be happy to help you. I think at this point, you have a pretty good idea of what executable apps are and how you'd go about using them and how you'd go about troubleshooting them. So I'm going to turn it over to Reetu, and she's going to tell you about Vice apps. So there you go.
Hey all, thanks for joining in today. So I'm gonna talk about VICE, which is the Visual Interactive and Computing Environment, a subsystem in the DE for easy to access, easy to use access for RStudio, Jupyter Lab, and any other GUI-based application. So we have the VICE out from a while now, and it's being used by CyVerse users for research, for classroom teaching, for workshops. I have a couple of slides here, and then I'll demonstrate how to launch a Jupyter Lab app in the DE. So first of all, why do we need this interactive subsystem in the DE? So, well, for launching any graphical user interface or Jupyter Lab, RStudio, or RShiny. And what Amanda has demonstrated about the executable apps, basically you find an app, you provide the inputs, you specify the command line parameters and submit your analysis, and after it runs to the completion, you get the output in your output folders. But what if you want to change some parameters, add or delete some data sets, then you need to rerun the app again. So VICE is needed in case of like if you want to interact with your data for the exploratory kind of analysis. And it has another use case for the classroom teaching. Students can open an account with CyVerse, which is of course free of use, and they can find the apps, they can run and share their analysis. Sorry, I forgot to put that in presentation mode. So VICE also addresses some of the computational challenges for the big data because it's a subsystem in the DE, so it can use the CyVerse compute resources and also the data storage for large-scale analysis. And let's think about if you have the large-scale data, you need to find out a resource where you're going to run your where you're going to perform your analysis, and you want to find a place where other people who are like your collaborators can access your data. And also what if after publication people want to find out your data, reuse, reproduce your analysis, then they also need to have access to your data for compute resources. And most important, important the computational environment that you have used. So we provide the, if you are working with a like couple of GBs of data, so we provide the Kubernetes service at the back end under the cover, which ensures which supports the reproducibility. So of course, this is zero install usage for the apps that are already integrated into the DE. But if you're familiar with Docker, then you can integrate your own apps, customize your apps. If you are a developer and you want to make your tools available to your users without teaching everyone, then it's an excellent tool to use. And also, when you're working on by using the advanced scalable cyber infrastructure like CyVerse, you're essentially moving your code and algorithm to the active storage where your data and where your data lives. So you are maintaining the complex analysis workflows on the active storage. And also it can, as I said, it can use the DE resources to support your large scale analysis and simultaneously supporting the reproducibility. So now who is WISE for? WISE is for researchers who can come find already integrated apps and run their analysis, authors who wanna create the apps that allows users to immediately interact with their computational environment and reproduce their results, developers who want to make their tools available to public. And of course, this is an excellent tool for the classroom teaching because instructors don't need to find a computational resource to run the analysis, or they don't need to have the technical expertise to install a tool. So from here, I'm moving to the demonstration part, how to launch a WISE app. So from the de.cyverse.org, you go to apps, and you will see some of the featured apps and the recipes for the Docker files for these files are available for these apps are available on the CyVerse WISE GitHub. So which is like you can modify those Docker files if you are familiar with Docker and you know how to integrate tools in CyVerse, or you can use those as base images to install additional packages for customized apps for your use. So I'm going to launch the Jupyter Lab here. And you can find the apps as Amanda's WISE apps, as Amanda mentioned, that by filtering by WISE or searching by Jupyter Lab or RStudio or by any name. Okay, so click next. So I'm gonna input a file here. So what it's going to do is it's gonna copy your file inside the Jupyter Lab. So this should be the smallest. Okay. So the bigger your data is, the longer the launch time will be for WISE apps. So click next, launch analysis. So after the analysis is launched, you will see is submitted, you will see the status here. And for the WISE apps, you need to click on the square arrow box. So it will take you to secure authentic URL that will launch the Jupyter Lab for you. So the file that I input is copied here. And there are a couple of ways to bring data in and out of these containers by using the by inputting before launching the app, or by using in the Jupyter Lab or RStudio terminal icommands. Icommands are already installed here, or by using this button CyVerse. You need to input your username and password, and you should be able to see your data stored folder content here. Okay, after you have finished your analysis, okay, so the first thing is WISE apps has a time limit of 48 hours. After that, your app will automatically finish. So you can always extend the time limit by sending the request on clicking on this wait bar. And if you are done with the analysis, terminate. And after termination, is going to copy your content of the container inside the your output folder. So you can find your all the content into the output folder there. So same way Amanda shared the app with me, you can share a running analysis also if you think that someone can troubleshoot for you. So you go to click on the app, share, and I can share with Amanda here. You need to type their CyVerse ID or search by their email, and she will get access to my Jupyter Lab or RStudio analysis. Okay, so I have a couple of cool new features that I want to show, and then I will talk about how to, if you want to teach with CyVerse, you want to use Wise for teaching, then how to send a request for the workshops. Okay, so this is the Cloud Shell app that allows you to launch the Bash terminal from the DE. So I'm not going to launch here because of the time limitation. And the other feature that I wanted to show is the instant launches. So for the instant launches, it allows you to launch an app in a single click. So you click on this play button and it will launch the app for you. Yeah, I don't know how we have to set it. Probably we have like many.
Yeah.
So when you send send us a request for the access to Wise, then it only allows you to launch like 2 concurrent jobs, not more than that. So probably I'm already running 2. If you're using for the first time when you're using Wise, you have to fill out a form. So if you click on an app, so then a form like this will pop up. So you need to fill out this form to get access to Wise. So it's still free of use. We want to make sure that the resources are being effectively used. Yeah, so at this point, okay, before taking the questions, I almost forgot. I'm gonna show you if you wanna teach or use Wise in the classroom or for a workshop, then how to request for that. So you go to users.cyverse.org and click on the workshops and request to host, click on the request to host your own workshop. So you can fill out this form and you need to mention here that you want to use DE Wise. So when you will add your participants, they will automatically have access to Wise because they're considered as part of the workshop. So they don't need to send us the request for getting access to Wise. Yeah, so that's all for today's webinar, and we're happy to take any questions you have.
Yeah, so any questions you have, feel free to type them in the chat window. And I'm going to open that up now. Okay. Okay, so does anyone have any questions at all? I haven't found anything that wasn't about oh, raised hand. Oh, right.
Yeah. Hello. Just want to know about requesting Vice access for a workshop. So if we fill out this form, then do the workshop attendees have to, before the workshop, get a CyVerse account and also request Vice access themselves? Or how does that work once we've kind of been filled out this form and been approved?
Yeah, so you should ask your participants to create an account with CyVerse. So I think after you fill out this form, this will not allow me to go on the next page, but after you fill out this, you go to next, and there will be an option to add your participants, and you can add the participants' names and their IDs, so they will have automatically access to Wise.
But they do have to get a CyVerse account, so you can add their user ID.
Yeah.
Okay, and if we don't have their user ID when we fill out this form, can we get back to it?
Yes. Yeah, you should be able to, when you go to workshops, it should show up as your workshop on the left-hand side here, I believe. My
It's-
workshops.
Good.
So you can
All right.
navigate back to it there.
And I can
Right,
provide
thank
a
you.
little bit more,
Oh,
a little
yeah.
bit more feedback for that. If you want to email support at CyVerse with your your list of participants and their emails, we can also try to go in and populate that field for you if you don't have it at the time you create the workshop.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. Can you pipe apps so that the output of one app is then run in another app? Yes, you can. And that's called a workflow. And let me minimize the chat window for a second. So you can't really search for workflows very well, but I can show you how to build one. So if you went to create, you have the option of create workflow, and you have to give it a name and description. Okay, and then you can just add the apps. So let's search for Blast. Okay, so there's Blast. If you wanted to use Blast N, let's say, I seem to have opened Blast N. That's not quite what I meant to do. Anyway, I won't go through the whole process, but basically you add the apps here and it tells you what order to put them in. And then the input of one becomes, or the output of one becomes the input of the second one, and so forth. There is a caveat here, is it has to be a pipeline. So it's one app goes into another, goes into another, goes into another. It can't be the output of two apps goes into a single second one. And that's just a limitation at the moment. I don't know how that's going. So yeah, that's called a workflow. It's absolutely possible. Workflows basically look just like apps when you search for them in here, but there'll be extra pages of information to fill in when you actually launch the app, because you're filling in basically every app in the pipeline. Yeah, good.
So is there a way for Git apps to be sort of automatically imported into here through some kind of mechanism?
So when you say Git apps,
Like you have an app that is that has a repository on Git and you want to pull that.
oh yeah, so I'm going to let Reetu talk about Git for a second.
Yeah, so you need to package your code into a Docker container. And when you create we haven't covered really how to do the tool integration in CyVerse, but you should be able to find some documentation on learning.cyverse.org for this. And yeah, and then you need to create the image, put that on a public repository like Docker Hub. And from there, you can provide that Docker image and it should be able to run your container. But to answer, short answer is to directly GitHub repos, you can't import that.
Okay.
You want to add?
No, I was just going to say, you may be able to get things in from Git in the terminal of a Vice app.
Oh yeah, you can run it that way.
So if you have like an R script on Git, you can open an RStudio Vice app and then pull in your R script and run it.
But as soon as your analysis is finished, if you want to come back, you need to redo that.
Yeah, it'll only last as long as the analysis is running.
Oh, I see. And is there a time frame that we can allocate for our output to remain in our in the analysis container, so that if we want to sort of, if somebody else is inspecting it and then we want to reanalyze it, how long does that last, kind of?
So yeah, if you want to talk about the
So
how long they normally last.
So in your analysis folder, it will create, unless you provide a new output folder, it will create output folder with like timestamp. So it should be there with CyVerse to get the data storage of 100 gigs. So as long as you are under 100 gigs, we're not going to delete anything.
Right. So it's always there, and you can always relaunch an app, just like I showed you for the others. And the other thing is, did we talk about extending the runtime on a Vice app?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can always, if you need someone to look at it, you can extend your runtime by clicking on the hourglass. And that'll give them a little extra time to go into your analysis and look around and test things for you.
And you can't go to the output folder till your analysis is finished.
Right. So once the analysis is finished, then it's in the output folder, but it'll stay there until you delete it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, how many more messages? Let's see. Can you develop a Vice app and make it publicly available? Absolutely. You have to do basically the same thing. You'll have to have a Docker image in a public registry. And once you've got that, you can add it as a tool in CyVerse. And building Vice apps is actually much easier than building executable apps as far as the interface goes, because it's really just, would you like to input an input file? And then that's all you have to add. But yeah, you basically have to have a Docker container. And that may be something you build, or it may be something someone else has built that you've just acquired. Are there any documentation or tutorials on how to build executable and Vice apps? Yes, there are. So if you go to learning.cyverse.org, CyVerse.org, this is going to take us to workshops because that's where I was last. Tool and app integration on the left-hand side table of contents here. And then this is the Vice documentation. DE tool integration is how you make one that runs locally. And I think there may actually be some information in here on how to do OSG integrations. Yeah. We don't have any documentation right now on how to do TAC HPC integration. But if you're interested in that, we could hook you up with some of the people who work there who are doing those at the moment. So yes, you can absolutely get to the documentation. Way to use FTP to transfer data over to CyVerse. No, you can use iCommands. And let me see if I can, while I'm in the documentation, search for iCommands. And apparently it's not going to work there, but searching tool integration. Okay, well, let me see if I can. Okay, anyway, there's documentation for how to use iCommands in the read to docs data store. I think it's under the data store. Data store guide and iCommands. So yeah, you have to install iCommands, and then that works in a very similar way to FTP if you're used to using put and get. This is iPut and iGet, and that's how you can transfer larger files in and out of the data store.
And it does the parallel transfer, so it should be faster.
Yes. Okay. Oh, thank you, Mary Margaret, for entering the link to the documentation. Okay. Are there, oh, no, more messages? It says more messages. Okay. All right. So if there aren't any more questions for us.
But one more quick question, follow-up question. So you mentioned about the Docker image. So once I have the image, so how much time does it take to, in terms of like, if I'm a newcomer and if I want to integrate that with the app, executable app or Vice app, how much time does it take?
So once you have the Docker image, the hard part is done. If you go to the discovery environment and you go to the apps tab, if you go to manage tools, then under more actions, add tool, and you're basically going to give it a name, select what type of app you want, interactive or executable or OSG. And then you're going to provide the image name and tag at the, basically providing where it is in a public registry. And then once you hit, oh, I can't move that one. Okay, once you hit save, that tool is now in CyVerse. And so adding an app on top of that, particularly for a Vice app, will be very, very quick. You basically, you create app and then choose a name for your app. And then you add a section. In the section, you can add parameters. So for a Vice app, it would just be new section. I'll just call it new section. Add a parameter, input file. And then you could save this and that would be a Vice app. It wouldn't be a very nice Vice app because it doesn't have any real labels, but it would be a Vice app, technically it would work. So it shouldn't take you very long at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Going once, going twice, any more questions? All right, well, if there are no other questions for us, thank you for everyone for joining us today. Please join us in 2 weeks for our next webinar when I'll show you features in CyVerse that are designed to help your data be more fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. To register, please visit our website events page. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and I will see you back here in 2 weeks.